Rio de Janeiro, March 23, 1991. It was a hot and humid Saturday, typical of the end of summer in Rio. The thermometer read Teresa and Israel Rustly, while Renata Campos Vieira, 27 years old, an executive secretary at a multinational company in Thafang, the city center, was preparing to leave her apartment in Copacabana. She wore a pair of jeans, a white linen blouse, and carried a small brown leather purse. Her brown hair, tied in a ponytail, framed a face with delicate features. Smiling in the last photo taken by her roommate, Marcia Rezende, Renata was excited. That day, Marcia would later recall to investigators. She said she was going to visit some friends in Jacarapagua, in the West Zone, and would probably return late, maybe only on Sunday. Renata had moved to Rio de Janeiro 3 years earlier from Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais. An only child of a couple of university professors, she had built a promising career and, according to friends and family, was living a particularly happy moment. Recently promoted at work and about to start a postgraduate course, Renata had plans to travel abroad later that year. At 3:42 p.m., a young woman sent a message to her mother via pager, a communication device common at the time. "All good here. Mom, I'm going to Ricardo and Paula's house today. I'll call tomorrow. Kisses." This would be the last documented communication from Renata Campos Vieira. According to the investigation records, Renata left her apartment around 4:30 p.m. The building's doorman, Severino Gomez, confirmed seeing her leave and take a taxi on Avenida Nossa Senhora de Copacabana. She was just like always, smiling. Polite. She said she was going to Jacarapagua and asked me to call a taxi, which I did promptly, he stated. The taxi was later identified as being driven by Jose Carlos Mendonca, 42 years old. In his statement, the driver confirmed taking Renata to the Jardim Primavera condominium in Jacarapagua, where she got out around 5:45 p.m. due to heavy traffic on the Yellow Line that late afternoon. The couple Ricardo Martins and Paula Gomes, friends of Renata from university, confirmed that she arrived at their house around 6 p.m. for a dinner with friends. In addition to the couple and Renata, there were 3 more people present: Carlos Eduardo Tavares, Bianca Montero, and Fernando Neves, all in their 30s and colleagues of Ricardo. "It was a pleasant evening," Paula recalled. "We ate, drank wine, talked about work, travel, future plans, nothing that indicated any problem. Renata was happy, talking about her recent promotion and her plans to study abroad." The gathering lasted until around 11:30 p.m., when the guests started to say their goodbyes. According to the initial statements from all the attendees, Renata was the first to leave, saying she was tired and needed to wake up early on Sunday to visit an aunt who was sick. "I offered to call a taxi for her, but Renata said she had already requested one by phone and that the driver was waiting for her at the entrance of the condominium," Ricardo Martin said. "I accompanied her to the elevator. We said goodbye, and that was the last time I saw her." The doorman of the Jardim Primavera condominium, Josu Pereira, was on duty that night. In his initial statement, he stated that Renata left the building around 11:45 p.m. and got into a dark car that was waiting for her outside. "I couldn't see well the make or plate number. It was night, and the street lighting wasn't good. I just saw it was a dark car, possibly black or navy blue," he said. On Sunday, March 24th, Marcia Rezende began to worry when, by noon, Renata still hadn't returned to the apartment and wasn't answering calls on her pager. At 2:30 p.m., Marcia called Renata's parents in Belo Horizonte, who confirmed they hadn't received any call from their daughter that day. The concern grew when, on Monday, March 25th, Renata didn't show up for work. Her boss, Lucana Brandao, called the apartment to inquire about the absence, as Renata had never missed work without notifying anyone in advance. It was at this point that Marcia decided to go to the 1052nd Police Station in Copacabana to report the disappearance. I realized something was wrong. Renata was extremely responsible, organized. She would never disappear like that without giving an explanation to anyone, especially to her family and work, Marcia stated in the police report. Renata's parents, Cantenio and Helena Vieira, immediately traveled from Belo Horizonte to Rio de Janeiro upon receiving the news. They arrived on Tuesday, March 26th, and joined forces with Marcia and other friends to start private searches while the police began the official investigation. If you want to follow more cases like this, that shake society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel to not miss any investigation. The investigation into the disappearance of Renata Campos Vieira was assigned to Detective Roberto Montero from the Missing Persons Discovery Division TDDPA of the Rio de Janeiro Civil Police. The first 72 hours were crucial, with teams working on multiple fronts simultaneously. In missing person cases, the first hours are critical, explained Detective Montero in a press conference held on March 28, 1991. We are exploring all possibilities, from an accident or undiagnosed health problem to more serious scenarios. The first line of investigation focused on the route Renata supposedly took after leaving her friend's apartment in Jacarapagua. The taxi driver, who supposedly had been waiting for her at the entrance of the condominium, became a key figure, but there was no record of a call to any taxi company in the area that night under Renata's name. The telephone companies were contacted to provide the call records from the phones in Ricardo and Paula's apartment, as well as from the public phone closest to the condominium. No calls to taxi services were identified for the corresponding period. That raised the first red flag the detective would recall years later. If she didn't call a taxi, who was waiting for her at the entrance of the condominium? Investigators interviewed all the people who were at the gathering that night once again. The statements remained consistent regarding Renata's behavior during dinner and the approximate time she left. However, small discrepancies appeared in their statements about who suggested that she leave first. In her second testimony, Bianca Montero mentioned that Fernando Neves had insisted on calling a taxi for Renata. He seemed very eager, almost anxious for her to leave, she stated. Fernando, in turn, vehemently denied such behavior, claiming that he only offered help when Renata expressed the desire to go home. Renata's apartment was thoroughly examined. All her documents, including her passport and bank cards, were in their proper places. Her toothbrush and personal hygiene products were still in the bathroom. 2 empty suitcases were on top of the wardrobe, suggesting that she hadn't planned a trip. We found her diary, reported Inspector Carlos Drummond, one of the officers in charge of searching the apartment. The last entries were about her work promotion and plans for graduate school. Nothing indicating personal or professional problems, much less an intention to disappear voluntarily. At the same time, investigators requested footage from security cameras at businesses along major roads between Jacarapagua and Copacabana, hoping to identify the vehicle that had transported Renata. However, in 1991, surveillance systems were limited, and only a few banks and gas stations had functioning equipment. A videotape recovered from a gas station on the Yellow Line showed a dark vehicle, possibly a Monza or Chevette, passing by at 12:17 a.m. on March 24th. However, the image quality was insufficient to identify the license plate or the occupants. Renata's personal life was scrutinized for potential conflicts or problematic relationships. It was discovered that she had ended a 2-year relationship with Eduardo Ferreira about 3 months before her disappearance. It was a peaceful breakup by mutual agreement, Eduardo stated in his testimony. We remained friends, and we talked occasionally. I was traveling for work in São Paulo that weekend, which was confirmed by the hotel and the airline. Renata's bank records showed no suspicious activity. Her last withdrawal had been on Friday, March 22nd, in the amount of 200 reals, according to the values at the time, at an ATM near her workplace. Her savings, approximately 12,000 reals, remained untouched in her savings account. After 2 weeks of intense searching with no concrete results, the investigation began to lose momentum. Renata's parents, desperate, hired a private detective, Rogério Campos, who was not related to the family, and offered a reward of 5,000 reals for information on their daughter's whereabouts. "We will find her, whatever it takes," declared Antonio Vieira in an emotional appeal during a television program dedicated to missing persons. "Renata is our only daughter, our world. We ask anyone who knows anything, no matter how small, to contact us or the police." Media coverage of the case intensified. Newspapers such as O Globo and Jornal do Brasil headlined the disappearance of Renata, highlighting her exemplary life and the lack of apparent reasons for a voluntary disappearance. TV programs like Linha Direita and Fantastico produced special segments reconstructing the last known moments of Renata. At the end of April 1991, approximately 1 month after her disappearance, an anonymous tip came to the police station. A woman who refused to identify herself claimed to have seen Renata boarding an interstate bus at the Novo Rio bus station, bound for São Paulo, on the morning of March 24th. Teams were immediately sent to check the bus ticket records and security footage from the bus station. After days of investigation, it was concluded that the information was false. The description given by the informant did not match Renata, and no ticket records were found in her name. Unfortunately, high-profile cases often attract false leads, lamented Detective Montero. Each of them must be verified, which consumes time and valuable resources in the investigation. In June 1991, 3 months after the disappearance, the police decided to review all the testimonies and reconstruct the night of March 23rd with all those involved. It was at this point that the first significant inconsistencies emerged. During the reconstruction on June 15, 1991, Fernando Neves showed visible nervousness. His version of the moment when Renata left the apartment underwent substantial changes. He had initially stated that he stayed in the living room while Ricardo accompanied Renata to the elevator. However, in the reconstruction, he admitted to having briefly left the apartment, claiming he had gone to his car to get a CD that he wanted to lend to Paula. This inconsistency immediately caught our attention, reported Inspector Drummond. Why omit such a seemingly trivial detail? And why change the story 3 months later? Confronted with the discrepancy, Fernando gave confused explanations, stating that he had not considered the fact important in his first testimony. The investigation took a new direction when the police discovered that Fernando owned a navy blue Chevette, similar to the vehicle captured by the gas station camera on the Yellow Line. A thorough search was conducted on Fernando's vehicle, which was still the same as it had been in 1991. In the trunk, microscopic traces of blood were found, already quite degraded by time. The material was sent for lab analysis, but with the technology available in 1991, it was not possible to accurately determine if the blood was human or who it belonged to. The noose began to tighten when doorman Josu Pereira, in a new statement, revealed a crucial detail. That night, I saw when the girl left the building and got into the dark car. What I didn't mention before is that I recognized the driver as one of the guests at the party. He had arrived earlier, and I had checked his name on the authorized visitors list. When asked why he had omitted this information, Josu confessed to having received 500 reals to forget this detail. I was scared afterward. When the case started to appear on TV, I realized the seriousness, but I had already accepted the money and felt ashamed to tell the truth. Based on this new evidence, Fernando Neves was formally indicted as the main suspect in the disappearance of Renata Campos Vieira in July 1991. However, without the victim's body and with still circumstantial evidence, the investigation continued to face significant challenges. The public prosecutor's office chose not to file charges at that moment, requesting additional investigations. Fernando Neves hired one of the most renowned criminal defense lawyers in Rio de Janeiro, Augusto Mendes, who built a defense based on the fragility of the evidence and the media contamination of the case. "My client is being judged by the press, not by the evidence," he stated in a press conference. The case remained open with sporadic investigations in the following years, but without significant advances. Renata's parents never gave up on finding their daughter. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, they organized marches and events to keep the case alive in the collective memory. In 1996, 5 years after her disappearance, the tragedy deepened when Antonio Vieira, Renata's father, passed away from a heart attack. Close friends reported that he never recovered from the trauma of losing his daughter without knowing her whereabouts. Helena Vieira, Renata's mother, continued the relentless search, dedicating her life to the cause of missing persons. The turning point came on March 23, 2001, exactly 10 years after the disappearance. The building that housed the Jardim Primavera condominium had been sold and was undergoing complete renovations to be transformed into a commercial building. During the work in the area that had previously been Ricardo and Paula's apartment, who had moved to São Paulo in 1993, workers removed the laundry tank to install new plumbing. It was a shock. As soon as we lifted the concrete tank, we realized something was wrong with the floor underneath it, reported Josiah Santos, the foreman in charge of the renovation. The cement was different. It looked like it had been broken and redone. When we started digging, we found human bones. The police were immediately called. The area was cordoned off, and forensic experts from the Medical Legal Institute carefully removed the remains. It was a complete human skeleton, buried about 40 centimeters deep, directly beneath the concrete tank. Leave a comment. Never give up on the truth if you believe all the missing deserve to be found. The discovery of the remains under the laundry tank reignited the case, which, although never officially closed, had lost priority in the police investigations. Detective Eduardo Barreto, who took over the case after Roberto Montero's retirement, immediately ordered the formation of a task force dedicated exclusively to identifying the remains and solving the case. The skeletal remains were carefully transported to the Rio de Janeiro Medical Legal Institute, where a multidisciplinary team, including forensic anthropologists, pathologists, and odontologists, began a meticulous analysis process. We had a nearly complete skeleton, which is rare in cases of body concealment with so much time passed, explained Dr. Claudia Martins, the forensic anthropologist responsible for the initial analysis. The bones were in good condition due to the dry conditions and being protected by a layer of concrete. The first step was to determine the basic biological profile: sex, age, height, and possible particularities. The analysis of the pelvis and skull indicated that the remains belonged to a female individual aged between 25 and 35 years. The calculated height, based on the long bones, was between 1.65 and 1.70 meters. These data were consistent with Renata Campos Vieira, Dr. Martins observed, but we needed more concrete evidence for a positive identification. The dental team, led by Dr. Roberto Almeida, compared the dental arc of the skeleton with Renata's dental records, obtained from her dentist in Belo Horizonte. We found 12 points of coincidence, including root canal treatments on the upper right premolars and a specific filling on the left lateral incisor. The specialist reported, "The probability of two people having exactly the same dental pattern is virtually nil." At the same time, DNA samples were extracted from the bones and compared with Helena Vieira's genetic material, Renata's mother. The results, obtained through the newly implemented forensic genetics laboratory at the civil police, confirmed the first-degree kinship. On April 17, 2001, the final report from the Medical Legal Institute officially confirmed the remains found beneath the tank belonged to Renata Campos Vieira. The forensic analysis also revealed crucial details about the circumstances of her death. Fractures were identified in the hyoid bone, suggesting strangulation, and a blunt force fracture in the right temporal bone of the skull, indicative of a blow with a blunt object. The most likely cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation by strangulation, possibly preceded by a head trauma that may have rendered the victim unconscious, concluded Dr. Paulo Mendes, the forensic pathologist responsible for the case. The examination of tissue remnants found with the skeleton revealed fragments of a white linen blouse and blue jeans, corresponding to the clothes Renata was wearing when she disappeared, according to Marcia Rezen's testimony. Finally, we had concrete physical evidence, declared Detective Barreto. The case ceased to be a disappearance and officially became a qualified homicide, followed by corpse concealment. The news of the identification of Renata's remains was met with a mixture of grief and relief by Helena Vieira. For 10 years, I lived in a limbo between hope and despair. Now I can finally bury my daughter and begin my mourning, she said in a press conference, visibly emotional. But I want justice. I want to look into the eyes of the person who took my Renata from me. With the confirmation of the remains' identity and the evidence of homicide, the focus of the investigation shifted entirely to Fernando Neves. Now 40 years old, he had moved to Florianopolis in 1996, where he ran a guest house. On April 20, 2001, a police team executed a temporary arrest warrant against Fernando at his residence in the Jurok resort area. Simultaneously, search and seizure warrants were carried out at his guest house and at a warehouse he owned on the outskirts of the city. During the search of the warehouse, investigators found a sealed box with personal belongings, including a diary with notes from the time of Renata's disappearance and photographs of the victim in social situations, some apparently taken without her knowledge. Fernando was transferred to Rio de Janeiro, where he remained silent during his first interrogation, following the advice of his lawyer. However, when faced with forensic evidence, the location of the body, a place he had access to, the records found in his storage, and the testimony of the doorman, Fernando Neves decided to confess to the crime on April 23, 2001. His confession, recorded on video in front of his lawyer, revealed disturbing details. "I had been in love with Renata since we met 3 years ago," Fernando admitted. "I tried to get closer to her, but she only saw me as Ricardo's friend. When I found out she broke up with her boyfriend, I saw my chance." Fernando explained that he had planned the night carefully, suggesting to Ricardo that he invite Renata for dinner. During the dinner, he tried to impress her, but realized she wasn't interested. When she said she was leaving, he offered to call a taxi, but actually planned to take her himself. "I told her I was going to my car to get a CD, but I actually went to move my car near the condo exit." Fernando said that when Renata left, he offered to take her to Copacabana. She initially refused, but later agreed after he insisted it was dangerous to wait for a taxi that late. "On the way, I told her I loved her and that we could be happy together," he said. Renata was uncomfortable and said she only saw me as a friend. His confession continued. When he realized she was rejecting him, he drove to a quiet area near Barra da Tijuca. There, an argument turned violent. "I lost control. She threatened to tell Ricardo about me. She said I was scaring her. I tried to kiss her by force. She pushed me and hit her head against the car window. I panicked when I saw the blood. Fernando confessed that in a fit of anger, he strangled Renata, and when he realized she was dead, he panicked. He decided to return to Ricardo and Paula's apartment, using the key he had as a close friend of theirs. They were already asleep. I took the body to the service area, which was the most isolated part of the apartment. I broke the floor under the tank with tools I found there. I dug and buried her there. In the following days, he returned to the apartment when he knew they were away to finish covering the body with concrete. Ricardo and Paula never suspected anything. Fernando also confessed that he felt guilty for years, moving to another city and distancing himself from old friends. I thought about turning myself in many times, but fear always stopped me. Every time the case came up in the news, I panicked. With his detailed confession and physical evidence, the public prosecutor's office filed charges for first-degree homicide and concealing a body. In October 2001, Fernando Neves stood trial and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Ricardo and Paula, who returned to Rio de Janeiro to testify, were shocked and guilty for never suspecting their friend. It's unimaginable that we lived over Renata's grave for 2 years without knowing, Paula said, crying. We will never forgive ourselves for not noticing. Helena Vieira, Renata's mother, attended every trial session and confronted her daughters. Kill her with dignity. After the verdict, she said, no punishment will bring my Renata back, but today justice took an important step. Now I can finally give my daughter a proper rest, with her name and her story restored. Renata's case became a symbol in Brazil, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but also because of the persistence of the investigation over a decade. It was one of the first major cases in Brazil to use advanced forensic anthropology techniques and DNA analysis to identify old remains. As a result, the Renata Vieira Law was passed in 2003, which created a national registry for missing persons and specific protocols for investigating disappearances. Helena Vieira, who passed away in 2015 at 76, spent her final years working with the Brazilian Association of Families of Missing Persons, an organization she helped create. The organization provides emotional and legal support to families in similar situations. Renata's story, tragically interrupted at the age of 27, remains a painful reminder of human vulnerability and the importance of effective investigation and justice systems. If you've read this far, it's because you care about these cases that affect families forever. Leave a comment saying, I watched until here to get to know you and see who really cares about finding the truth. Don't forget to like and share this story to spread awareness and remind people about the importance of never giving up on the search for truth and justice. 20 years after Renata's case was resolved, its impact continues to shape Brazil's criminal investigation system and society. What started as an unexplained disappearance turned into one of the country's most important homicide and body concealment cases, leaving a lasting legacy. The Renata Vieira Law, implemented in 2003, changed the way disappearances are investigated. In Brazil, one of its key provisions was the immediate registration of missing persons, without the 24 or 48-hour waiting period that used to be required. It also established a national database for missing persons, which allowed information to be cross-referenced across states. Before this law, missing persons cases were often given low priority by the police, explains Dr. Viviane Torres, a criminal law expert and professor. The Renata Vieira Law changed the paradigm, making disappearance an emergency that requires immediate attention from authorities. The law made a significant impact. According to the Ministry of Justice, in the 5 years after its implementation, the rate of missing persons found in Brazil increased by 34%. not because more people were found alive, but because many cases that had been ignored for years were finally solved, giving closure to families at the Brazilian Association of Families of Missing Persons, founded by Helena Vieira, grew and became an important organization. With branches in 12 states, ABFPD provides not only emotional support, but also legal help and resources for publicizing cases. Helena's most important legacy was showing that families of missing persons don't have to face this pain alone, said Carlos Mendonça, the current president of the association. She turned her personal tragedy into a collective force that helps hundreds of families every year. In 2011, 20 years after Renata's disappearance, ABFPD opened the Renata Vieira Center in Belo Horizonte. This center offers free psychological support to families of missing persons and provides training for public security professionals on how to handle such cases. The case also helped advance forensic techniques in Brazil. The Forensic Anthropology Lab at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, established in 2005, was partially inspired by the challenges of identifying Renata's remains. The techniques we use today to identify skeletal remains are far more advanced than what was available in 2001, said Dr. Mauricio Costa, the lab director. We can now extract DNA from very small samples, create detailed facial reconstructions, and determine time of death with much more accuracy. Fernando Neves served 17 years in prison, transferring to a semi-open regime in 2018 for good behavior. During his time in prison, he earned a law degree and, according to prison reports, showed remorse for his crime. In a 2019 interview for a TV program on inmate rehabilitation, Fernando, now 58, reflected on his actions. I think about what I did every day and the pain I caused. I know nothing can bring Renata back or ease her family's suffering. I live with this weight and guilt every day. Ricardo and Paula Martins, who divorced in 2005, took different paths in life, but both still carry emotional scars from the case. Ricardo became an activist for urban safety after going through more trauma. His eldest son was kidnapped in a lightning kidnapping in 2010, but was fortunately rescued without serious injuries. The Renata case showed me how quickly life can change and how people close to us can hide things we don't know, he said in an interview with O Globo in 2021, marking the 30th anniversary of Renata's disappearance. I learned the hard way to appreciate every moment with the people we love because we never know when it could be the last. Paula, on the other hand, became a psychologist specializing in trauma, working with families of victims of violence. I never fully got over the feeling that we could have somehow prevented what happened, she said in a rare public statement. Turning that guilt into something positive was how I dealt with the trauma. Marcia Rezende, Renata's former roommate who first reported her disappearance, keeps Renata's memory alive in her own way. Every year, on Renata's birthday, July 17th, she writes an open letter to her friend on social media, sharing events of the year and her personal thoughts. Dear R, you would be 57 today. I wonder what the lines on your face would look like if you'd have gray hair like mine, she wrote in her 2021 letter. The world has changed so much since you left. The internet is everywhere, phones fit in your pocket, and a pandemic stopped the world. I miss you with every new discovery, every moment we can't share. Renata's grave, located at the KU Cemetery in Rio de Janeiro, became a place of pilgrimage for families of missing persons. Often decorated with flowers and notes, it became a symbol of hope for those still searching for answers about their loved ones. A simple plaque installed by Helena before her passing carries the ABFPD's motto, "For those we love, there is never a final absence." Finding the truth is the first step toward peace. In 2021, a documentary about Renata's case. Titled Sob, the Renata Vieira case won the Best Documentary Award at the Gramado Film Festival, bringing national attention back to the story and its impact on Brazilian society. As critics noted, the Renata Vieira case is not just about a terrible crime, but about how personal pain can turn into a collective fight for justice. It's a story of both the worst and best of humanity, how we can destroy lives, and how resilience can help us build legacies from tragedy that help others. This legacy lives on, not only through the laws and institutions created from the case, but also in the collective memory of a society that learned from this tragic story about the importance of truth, justice, and human solidarity in the face of extreme pain.